people who make good carpenters are also artists, and we have to look at symmetry and we have to have an artistic eye for those things. So I would say to people who maybe are in an artistic career to think of carpentry, and for women especially, to come into carpentry and have a different viewpoint.
Welcome to the Fine Homebuilding Pro Talk podcast, a regular discussion with building industry professionals. This is Senior Editor Patrick McGomb. Today I'm joined by Lead Carpenter for Iron Brothers Construction, Dejah Leger. Did I say your last name right, Dejah?
Leger.
Leger. Ooh, super French. All right.
Oh, super French.
All right. You can find the Fine Homebuilding Pro Talk podcast and the original Fine Homebuilding podcast at finehomebuilding.com/podcast. You can leave feedback and ask questions there too. It is a pleasure to have you on here, Dejah.
Thanks. Thanks for having me on.
So, Andy Engel told me that in a room full of people who were getting trained in a carpentry subject, and he happened to be there, that you were the only person with a notebook, and he thought that singularly qualified you to be on the Pro Talk podcast as somebody who was really interested in improving their craft. And I think that's awesome.
That's a wonderful recommendation.
What were you guys learning? Do you remember this?
Oh, absolutely. It was Mike Wharton was giving a talk on kitchen layout, and I was taking notes on how to build a story pole and how to be a better, lead carpenter in that sense. So it was great. I still have those notes.
That's awesome. Have they proved helpful?
Absolutely.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So briefly, tell me, are your family's healthy, and are you able to work normally? What's going on?
We are healthy, thank goodness. Seattle was one of the epicenters, obviously, of the outbreak. So we closed down very early. We still are barely just starting to reopen. So my family, luckily, is healthy. We have a multi-generational family, so we took a lot of extra precautions. And I was able to mostly stay home and homeschool my children for the last month and a half or so. So
they're little, right?
11 and 13 right now. So
yeah,
little-ish. They're a great age. They mostly take care of themselves.
How was that? Our son went upstairs in the barn and went to school for 6 hours a day without much interaction on our behalf, but he's a lot older. Wow. How'd it go?
It was a really good experiment. It was a really great way to connect with my kids and a great reminder of why I like being in the workforce as well. And I don't mean that in in a bad way. Just, it is a lot of work. Yeah. Teaching kids is a lot of work. So, yes. Yeah.
And trying to do your normal job at the same time is even more complicated.
Exactly. I took a lot of the time myself just to continue my own education in carpentry. I, would read a lot, watch a lot of YouTube videos, listen to a lot of podcasts like this one. It was a lot of self-education time that I took to try to better myself in that period.
Are residential construction sites still open, or have they reopened?
They have. The first wave is a lot of construction companies worked really closely to be able to open essential projects. So essential projects being kitchens and bathrooms so that people have access to sanitation. Sure. So those stayed open. We recently were able to start working on existing projects we had before the shutdown that aren't essential. And now we are starting to finally open back up to new projects.
Have you noticed, is your company getting a lot of calls from people who are stuck at home and looking around saying, boy, I need all this stuff done?
It's booming. Yeah. I mean, I would say that a lot of people are not just now, but are really realizing that our homes are our castles. We're now looking at being stuck in our homes for probably a good while, and making those investments in making them comfortable places for us to live are really valuable. So I do anticipate, just with my limited knowledge of how, the economy goes, I do anticipate a lot of residential remodel in the upcoming year.
Interesting. So can you tell me first about the company you work for, what kind of projects they do, and the kind of clients you guys work for?
Yeah, absolutely. We work in the Shoreline area, which is just north of Seattle. So it's a smaller area, but very close-knit community. And we do only residential remodels, no new construction for our company. And the clients we work with are just fantastic. For me, it's been one of the neater aspects of getting into remodel is being able to work with people and get to know their tastes and, really make it a creative project for them.
And
We're I'm sorry.
please go ahead.
It is design build, so we're involved in both sides of that process in-house.
Do you have architects on staff, or do you have in-house designers who are not AIA?
We contract out.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
And do you work with a certain group of architects typically? Like a hand?
That's definitely something management would know more about.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
So being a carpenter, lead carpenter, is a second career for you, right? How did that come about,
Yes.
and what did you do before this?
Before this, I was really involved in the music and art industry. My husband had started a company for music publicity, and the two of us worked in this tiny little office together for 10 years and ran marketing and publicity for music. I did most of the graphic design, so I put together press kits and CD covers and posters back when posters for bands were a thing. Yeah. and we left, but that's kind of part of it, of why I left, is that it's an increasingly obsolete, it makes itself obsolete. There's so much technology involved in graphic design that outdates itself almost immediately, to the point where the platforms I was working on 5 years ago don't even exist. Like, I don't even know that I can translate documents anymore. So it's something that you always have to be riding the curve on and learning. And while I enjoy the learning, I don't like that knowledge becomes useless. And what I like about carpentry is it's constantly evolving and it's constantly updating, but it's never outdating itself. So the idea that I can work with somebody who's been doing this for 40 years and their knowledge still applies, and it will apply when I'm, what would that make me, an 80-year-old carpenter, I guess, that I can still use those skills. And that's a really unique thing to be able to say in this day and age where technology is moving so quickly and industries are evolving so fast.
I have never thought that. That's pretty profound.
Well, thank you.
It is. So are the people you work for helpful? Do they give you a hard time?
Oh, no. The people I work for are absolutely fantastic. And I will say, too, like, the team I work with in the office is half women as well. I mean, there is definitely, I do see more women in the industry. I see fewer women boots on the ground, bags on, but I hope to see that change as well.
And do you think that what can the rest of us in this industry do to make the residential construction business more welcoming and more diverse? What are some of the things that would make it better for people who aren't a 30-year-old white guy who's been doing this forever?
It's a great question, and I do think about it a lot because I do want to see more diversity. And I think there's a few things at play. I think that there's a misconception about the trades that needs to be fixed. We have a branding issue in the trades, and I think part of that is that it has been so long kind of the boys' club. Historically, there's a good reason for that. I mean, it was and is a very physically demanding job. And if it weren't for power tools, I would be at 5 foot tall at a very distinct disadvantage in this field where I can't match the strength of my coworkers. But because it is becoming more of a level playing field, both with a labor shortage and with, the advent of and availability of power tools, the fact that it's becoming a more level playing field means it's opening itself up to more diversity. And so needs to be a push to bring people in who haven't been exposed to the trades and train them up. So the answer is really simple. How do you get more women and more people of diversity in the trades? You hire them. You simply reach out, you advocate, and when they come into the office for an interview, you say, yeah. Because if everyone's coming in with the same lack of experience, then you're all starting from scratch. And that's a great thing for us, not a great thing for the trades, except that it is starting to welcome more and more people into it.
Can you describe what have been the biggest challenges since the outbreak with regard to trying to keep your projects running, and or how has that affected how things are working?
It's not as bad as I feared when this all began. The biggest is material chain disruptions. So being able to get things like countertops that typically ship internationally is difficult. So clients have had, in some cases, to make entire new design decisions on the fly because the material is not available. Um, so
Are
there
they
is that.
accepting of that? Or are they just like, do they lose their mind?
Uh, I'm sure inside they're losing their mind because, these decisions were made so far in advance. And there is that frustration. But there's also no denying that we're all in the same boat in
Yeah.
terms of we all understand what's happening right now. And it's not just affecting certain people, it's affecting everybody. So there is an understanding as well. And hopefully down the line, they'll have a great story. They'll look at their countertop and say, oh, this is my COVID countertop. This is the one I had to choose because we were in the middle of a pandemic. So, hopefully it lends to kind of some history.
Yeah. I, I think about things all the day that I'm sure I will remember for the rest of my life. The job of a lead carpenter is very difficult, and I don't think anyone who's been in the residential construction business would argue with me. But it is also extremely important. You're the face of the company to your clients. You're managing the subcontractors on a day-to-day basis. You have to make sure that the subs and the employees do their jobs correctly and with care. You have to make sure everyone shows up at the right time. And so many things are outside of your personal control. Permitting, inspection, suppliers, client behavior. I know many old timers would say it takes decades of experience to get good at that, but you're pretty new to this, and explain that to me. And how do you do that?
Uh, I think about this question a lot because I did somewhat excel into this role fairly quickly. And I think that as a woman, and I know this is totally playing to stereotypes, but I do think that there's some truth that women can multitask very well. And so I kind of was able to step into that role. And, as a mother and as a woman, I'm constantly having my attention pulled in multiple directions anyway. So I was able to kind of apply those skills to being able to, manage the subs over here and manage the client over here and, do the physical framing over here. So it's taking practice for sure. I think that being able to relate to clients on a very unique level as a woman in carpentry lends itself to it's a different kind of management, which I find very, very easy. And I also work with a really great team, and I think that's a huge part of it is working with a team that you trust, where if I don't have an answer for something, I can instantly get an answer from the team. Like we all have each other's backs. And again, like I said, half my team in the office is women as well. And we work very closely and very well together.
What do you think what is it? Is it the ability to multitask exclusively, or are there other things that make someone good at being a lead carpenter or a project manager on a residential construction site?
I think a project manager and a lead carpenter really has to have passion for what they're doing. I don't think it can be just something as easy as I'm going to frame this up and get paid. Like you have to invest yourself in the project right alongside with the homeowner and advocate for them and get upset about the same things with them and encourage the subs to do their best because you want this to be the best house. And I do think that there's a lot of buy-in that you have to have, an emotional investment into the project to make it the best that it can be.
When I was running construction sites, I would have many sleepless nights, literally, where I was worried about projects. Do you experience that too?
All the time. And I keep telling myself every time I wake up, I've had like a dream about, oh my God, how am I going to, frame this thing? And I always have to remind myself, I'm not getting paid in my sleep. I need to not, be dreaming about work. This is on my own time. But I do. And I think any good carpenter does, because it shows that you are investing in a project because you want it to be your best work. And I think it shows a lot of investment. So I think constantly about the projects on my own time.
I would point out you have to be a patient person too. And I've worked with some people who are not, but they don't make good project managers. They might be good tradespeople, but they are not good managers.
It takes a different skill set to be able to manage people and to be able to do the physical labor. And there's a lot of reasons in that sense why often those two jobs are separated. A lot of people do just do a bags on only and a project management only. I'm really grateful that we combine them because I came into this industry with more of those soft skills of being able to deal with people and be very patient and very, calm and be able to multitask. And so it's actually, for me, it's been more of garnering those physical skills of framing and trim carpentry and everything else to kind of match up. So I did come in with that advantage, but it does take a very patient role to be a project manager.
And tell me your normal work day. You get to the job site and kind of get everyone going and tell me what happens.
Yeah, for the most part, I work the calendar. So I show up and I make sure that everyone's on schedule and that everyone's doing what they need to be doing. I do a lot of the physical labor myself. This last week I had to bump the painters up. And so I was doing all the mill work literally in front of them while they were behind me on their hands and knees, filling the nail holes. And we all laugh
That's
at it.
not
We all
stressful,
understand.
I'm sure.
Yeah, no, totally fine. Totally not stressful to be watched by painters. And so I'll be doing those kind of management and hands-on labor. I tend to bounce between at least 1 or 2 jobs a day.
I mean, different projects or different tasks?
Projects.
Wow.
Yeah. So keeping that all organized in my head as well, or any of our heads, is definitely a challenge as well. Takes some mental organization.
Are you responsible for having the material there for the Irons Brothers employees? I'm presuming the subs bring their own stuff or arrange for it to be there.
Yeah, I also help arrange some of their material deliveries as well. But yeah, that's all on my plate.
I don't know how you sleep.
Sometimes I don't.
By all accounts, you really enjoy making yourself a better home builder. What do you like to read or look at that you to help you learn the intricacies of this craft?
I don't think that there's any excuse in this day and age for not being able to access some of the highest quality information out there. I not to plug this show, but I listen to this show all the time.
Plug this show, please, to everybody.
I do. I listen to it while on the job site while I'm working. I watch all the videos on the Fine Homebuilding website. I am a member, so I could get the access to all those videos, and I just watch those things like TV. And there's some YouTube channels of really established carpenters that I follow.
Who do you like?
I follow the Essential Craftsman.
He does a freaking good job, doesn't he?
Yes, he does. And I really learn a lot every time I watch him build that spec house. He's got some good tricks in his bag.
And he seems like a very smart individual.
He does.
Thinks about things.
And he has a good way of explaining it. And I think that's a big part of it too.
Mm-hmm.
There is so much lingo. I mean, coming into the trades, it was like learning a different language. It still is. I mean, truly like a different language. And I love languages, so it's a good challenge, but also having someone be able to explain it in really simple terms so that I can get it and then apply it is very valuable. So books are great. I went to my local library and just checked out every single book I could. I'm definitely filling up.
Tell me honestly, did you find books that were current? Like when I've gone to the library looking up stuff, it's from the 50s and 60s, right? Yeah.
And again, there are still informational nuggets I can glean from those, but it also is outdated, and there is, I mean, we're not hand sawing lumber anymore. So there's a lot I can still get in terms of why and how we do things, why does there have to be a sill plate? Why, those kind of science questions behind what we do are still very valuable in those books. But obviously the techniques are updated. Mm-hmm. And that really has to be more of finding current people or just simply hands-on knowledge.
What I hear from young people who, I'm speaking in generalities here, as a population, don't read very much. I've had college professors tell me that college freshmen used to come in and be embarrassed that they don't read, but now they don't even care, right? It used to be something they apologize for, but now it's just the reality of life. How, as a media company charged with training young carpenters and carpenters generally, how do we do that without using words? What do you think are the best ways to do that?
We have to adapt. I mean, if people aren't reading, then find a different medium. I mean, I read all the time. I love reading, but if people need a different way to absorb knowledge, then we just have to make that content available and make it the best that we can. So if people are watching YouTube, you know, really step those up and make them awesome so that people get excited about it. And, and I wish that it weren't the case that people are reading less. I think reading is incredibly valuable, but why beat a dead horse? If people need a different way to get information, make that a reality for them.
That's true. You guys have I would describe it as a challenging climate to build in. When does it start raining and then when does it stop?
Never. Yeah, I actually love this climate to build in. I would rather.
Are you from that area originally?
I'm from Oregon, so I'm a Pacific Northwest girl. This climate to me is perfect. We get a lot of rain, but I'd rather work in the rain than beating sunshine and heat any day. I mean, the rain lends itself to interesting building issues. Obviously, we deal with a lot of moisture issues and a lot of seismic retrofitting because we're in an earthquake zone and we have a lot of rot, all those things that we do have to deal with. But generally, it doesn't impact we all have pop-up canopy tents that we work under, and it's lots of tarps, and we get her done.
I've had Pacific Northwest carpenters tell me that they will only buy nail bags that have holes designed in them because otherwise they fill up with water. Is that true?
I think someone was pulling your leg. I think it's genius, but not. We might have to take that idea and run with it and start a whole new tool bag company line, but no.
No. Okay.
No.
But how do you keep sheathing dry and stuff? Or do you just not worry about it? What, stuff just gets wet or what happens?
It's always nerve-wracking when we have to put a hole in somebody's house in the middle of winter when we're expecting torrential floods, basically. So we do a lot of tarping. We get really good at Durascrim and tarps and all sorts of ways to try to divert water.
What's Durascrim?
I hope I'm saying that right. It's like a very special tarp that's extra strong to withstand rain and wind, because we get wind too, obviously.
Sure.
So yeah, we have a lot of creative ways to deal with kites on houses, basically.
But what about foundation excavations? I mean, you guys are a remodeling firm mostly, but I'm sure you do room additions and stuff. How do you keep the hole from filling with water?
Creatively. Sometimes it's just the way it is. We take every precaution we can to try to get something, tarps wrapped in 2x4s, stapled to this and tacked to that. And, basically have to create an entire roof structure out of material just so that we can work in a place that's not going to fill up with rain.
One of my favorite parts of this job is talking to carpenters about their, regional challenges. I just find it fascinating. Can you tell me?
It's a lot of fun.
Is it? I don't know if it would be. I like roofing. How the heck do you do roofing in the wintertime? Or don't you?
Yeah. Well, we don't do a lot of torch down. So, definitely shingles are the way to go.
Can you put those on in the rain?
Cedar. The shingles, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And, cedar's really cheap out here. So we do a lot of cedar shingles as well. And yeah, roofers just do them in the rain, tie off, be safe, and put those shingles in.
Oh my God. That's mind blowing to me. So do you own your own home? It must be difficult for, tradespeople to afford real estate where you live, right? It's one of the most expensive cities in the country, right?
It is. Yeah, it's out of control. My husband and I were really fortunate that we were able to get in to the house market pretty early. I think we bought our house about 11 or 12 years ago. So we're really fortunate, but it is very difficult to find housing around here. It's a pretty big issue. A lot of carpenters are starting to move kind of to the suburbs and more out into the woods and then travel in. And then in terms of my own house, I get to kind of experiment a lot on my own house. And I've always been really handy. I always did the house repairs anyway. And that's actually how I kind of got picked up into this trade, is someone was like, oh, I like your fence. Have you ever thought of being a carpenter? So I definitely get to experiment a lot and practice.
Do you enjoy it, or is it a drag when you're doing it 40, 50, 60 hours a week?
Yeah, it's a little hard to come home and get motivated to do projects after I've been working all day. So
Yeah, I'm sure.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
I want to ask you two questions, and I'll see if I can remember. So, what do you think the solution is to the affordable housing problem in this country, and especially with regard to tradespeople and working class folk not having a place they can afford? What do we do about
Oh,
this?
oh man, that is a great question. I might have to get back to you on that one. I
Well, I asked
I
it to
honestly
everyone, and no one's given me a satisfactory answer yet. So,
and I think that's a really telling response is that it is something that no one has a good answer for. And it's something that we all struggle with and we're all trying to find what a good solution is. And I just don't see any that are realistic at this point. And
what about
yeah.
Seattle has pretty flexible accessory dwelling unit
Mhm.
regulations, right? Do you think that's a part of the solution to this problem?
Actually, yeah. Yeah, we have even in the past year or 2 years really loosened those restrictions further, and we are starting to see a lot more dados or is that right? Dados? Uh, and tiny homes are a big thing. You know, we're starting to see people expand their property so that they can have a lot more little units on it. So I think it's fantastic. There was actually a group I worked with at one point that built tiny homes for homeless women. It was a whole group of women carpenters came together and did that. And I think things like that are going to be a huge solution.
Do you think that the model Seattle's taken, where they're making it easier for people to put accessory dwelling units up, is going to take hold in other Pacific Northwest cities? Is that being talked about?
It is, and I sure hope it does. I think you know the more solutions that we can find, the better we're all going to be. You know, so I definitely hope that it is a trend that takes off.
Have they similarly made it easier to build multifamily in the Seattle area versus single family?
They have, yeah. There's definitely some pushbacks for the really big dwelling units, and the city I'm in, Shoreline, is actually in a really interesting space in that right now we're trying to figure out that balance between, you know, we're opening up a whole city street for dwelling units. Do we have residential? Do we have businesses that have to be on the first floor and then, you know, residential units above that? Can they be multifamily, single family? So we're actually in the transition period right now of how do we accommodate more people and better housing, primarily because we're getting a new light rail coming in right where I live. It's going to be across the street.
Are
So
you going to sell your house and make a killing? Or, I mean,
I've
then you have to buy
thought
another
about it.
house, right?
Exactly. And then it would pretty much just be a transfer over. Yeah. I mean, it's going to be really interesting to see specifically what happens here in Shoreline in the next couple of years in terms of how to accommodate and make housing more affordable for people.
So do people in Toronto welcome the light rail, or are they terrified that it's going to change their town?
Terrified. I mean, there's pushback, right? I mean, it's split. I would say it's split. Yeah, I'm actually really excited. I think anything that reduces carbon emissions that we can are able to take more mass transportation and have more people in transportation and not in their cars is great. I'm sure you've heard Seattle traffic is horrendous.
Yes, I've experienced it.
So yeah, it's bad.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I'm definitely for it, but it is going to change the face of Shoreline. And some people are really nervous about that, nervous about how are we going to control the influx of people? How are we going to preserve small business? How are we going to make space for businesses to come into Shoreline and keep the money in Shoreline? So there's definitely a lot of concerns, and we have a lot of city council meetings about it.
Do you
People come
go?
in and
Do you?
I do.
Yeah,
Yeah,
cool.
absolutely.
Do you testify in front of the council?
I have once, and it was terrifying. I've never done it again.
What did you testify about?
Well, the business I work for is a small business, and they have been having a lot of issues trying to stay in their location because it is very valuable property. So
Yeah.
it's an issue that they've been working on, and I testified on their behalf. Just
The one of the issues, right, is that when the real estate values climb, especially when you suddenly have this mass transit that's now available, everyone's taxes go up, and
Mhm.
oftentimes you can't afford to pay them if you're of limited income, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, those are terrifying. And for the most part, I love taxes. I really not love them, but I obviously want our schools to be good and the roads to be repaired. I want those things, but it becomes astronomical. It really is prohibitive when the taxes just keep climbing.
Yeah. Have you seen that since you guys have lived in your house?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Our value has gone up and that's great, but everything else goes up too.
Sure. Well, on that happy note. Dejah, thank you so much for being on the show. It's been such a pleasure talking with you.
Well, thank you. It's been a pleasure talking to you guys too.
What would you like to tell our audience about yourself or your career or people, anything? What do you got?
I would say that I came to this career as an artist, and I think that there's a lot of applicability between those two careers. I don't see them as distinct. I see them as very compatible. And I wish that carpentry would look at itself more as a creative trade. It is an art. And I think the people who make good carpenters are also artists. And we have to look at symmetry and we have to have an artistic eye for those things. So I would say to people who maybe are in an artistic career to think of carpentry, and for women especially, to come into carpentry and have a different viewpoint and have different artistic takes on things, because it is a creative trade.
Fantastic. Well, unfortunately, that's all the time we have for today. Thanks to Dejah for joining us, and thanks to all of you for listening. Please remember to send us your comments, questions, and suggestions to fhbpodcast@taunton.com. And please like, comment, or review us however you're listening. It helps other folks find our podcast. Thanks again for listening, everybody. Stay safe,